Welcome back, everybody, to me being annoyed about the Wheel of Time. And we're getting close to the end. This is more or less past the halfway point. We're talking about chapters, what's it called? 20 to 32. Of a memory of light. And things are still pretty dark, sort of, and boring, like really, really boring, unnecessarily boring, and over the top spectacular, and all these other things. All right, I guess it's time we go there and do that, shall we? Well, cheers. All right. So, we got a lot to cover today, because the battle is in full swing, and we have more and more of, well, the thing going on that I spoke about already, structure-wise, and that is we have our 4 campaigns. We have the campaign in Fakandar, which is the valley before Sheol Ghul, where Rotal Itiralda and the Aiel are hanging out. We have the battle around Tarvin's Gap with Lan and our great captain, Oglmar. Remember the guy from like the second book, from the Great Hunt, whom we meet there for a bit. That guy. And we have the campaign of Egwene and the great captain, Gareth Bryn. And the battle with the great captain, Davram Bashir, and what's the gang called? Queen Elaine, right. That one. So we have all of those. And yeah, so basically the structure is a very simple one. It's like each one of those captains got manipulated by Graendal, who, remember, is now very, very ugly because the Dark One certainly has like the mind of a 5-year-old when supposed justice and karma are concerned. But I guess we just have to live with that. But so each of those campaigns is now subtly failing because each of those great captains has been manipulated to make mistakes. We saw that already with, like, through Perrin's eyes in the Dreamlands. And now we see the results. And that's just boring. Because, as I already said, a lot of these, like, combats here are just, like, repetitive as fuck. Not very interesting. And we always have the same characters that are watching them, right? It's Lan in, like, in Tarvin's Gap. And it's Egwene in that area, and it's Elaine, and it's it's Itiralda himself in that part, right? So we always have the same kind of characters, and each of those plot lines is the same. Sometimes things go wrong, and sometimes someone starts doubting the great captain, and then they figure out that he's probably a dark friend and arrest them, and then we're done. And then each of those, not each of them, but all but one of those groups gets saved miraculously, so we can continue to where we need to go, which is a final stand at the Field of Merilor, under the command of, Matt. And, yeah, see, that's just unnecessary bloat, because yeah, I get the idea. You have several battles. This is a whole war. It's not just like one big battle like in Lord of the Rings. I see what you're doing there, but each of those plot lines is basically the same one. It's like we have someone who's supposedly super smart when it comes to battle, and they make weird mistakes. Everyone's like, well, they're probably just very tired. And then they figure out, no, it's more than that. And then we're like, oh, we're fucked. And then we drag some miraculous thing out of somewhere, and yeah. See, you could have, like, handled the same thing so much shorter. We don't need, like, several, like, battle scenes to figure that out. That's, like, multiple chapters that basically tell us the same story. And I'm like, I don't know, make one big chapter out of it. Make one big chapter where you have, like, these mistakes and just, like, something we've seen Brown and Sanderson do before, which is like jump within like a scene to like a different place and whatnot, like we did in Towers of Midnight with Perrin and Galland, for example. Like you have these options to make clear that each of those battles is failing at the same time through the same like treachery. That would be interesting. But in this case, we just basically sacrificed 200, 300 pages to do nothing. And I'm like, yeah, gets boring. And I mean, this is sort of what I meant with like the structure is there to bloat the book, because while this may make sense as a general plotline, which is we have 4 battles and the great captains get manipulated, get compromised, and then we need to find a new solution. So we meet up all together under a new captain or general who is immune against all of these magical attacks because he has that wonderful fox hat medallion. That makes like a lot of sense on paper, and I'm fine with that structure. But the way it is executed is just way too long because it's repetitive, just like my rambling until now was. So let's look at other smaller and larger concerns that I have with this. The appearance of Demon Dread and the Sharans. Look, it kind of makes sense. You talked about the fact that those people exist. I get it. All of that. But like to have like an entire new nation pop out of nowhere in the middle of battle, it just doesn't really feel that good to me. It's like you could have like built up that kind of plotline in a different way. There would have been so many other ways to make this less of a, oh, I need to come up with something, so I'll just invent a new country. It's like, yeah, I know it was mentioned before. It's like, still, it comes out of nowhere, and I know it's totally fine to have surprises in stories. I'm totally fine with all of that. But I feel oftentimes, especially when those kind of surprises drop out of nowhere in like very dramatic final big scenes, it feels a bit like a cheap trick. It feels a bit like a cheap trick to me. And it's also kind of unnecessary. It would have been totally fine to have like Demon Dread just like lead like an army of Trollocs. It would have totally worked. Apparently, he was already behind the attack on Camelin, so why not put him there? Why even draw the Sharans in there? And there's more problems with the Sharans that we need to talk about now. Remember about the problem with exoticism? And we already had with the Sea Folk and the Shan-Chan, and now of course we have it with the Sharans, who live on the other side of the Ale Waste and are maybe sort of a little like, I don't know, it's hard to describe, right? But silk comes from their place, so you can make that like, oh, it's like Asia. By Asia, I mean Chinese or whatever. It's obviously not that, because, you know, we have like a bit more complex world building in this world. But like what we get once again is like they show up and they have weird like hairstyles and weird tattoos, and they are barbaric as fuck. And it's just like it feels so over the top. It's like, why do those people that show up out of nowhere that are sort of like weird, why do they have to have like tattoos and stuff that in a way that is very much like connected to non-Western cultures? Why is something like this a completely like invented fantasy world so Eurocentric, so white and Eurocentric at the end of the day? And why do all those cultures that come from the outside have to have these cliches of barbarism or exoticism? It's just like, it's unfortunate is what it is. It's like you have like all the ways like to make them technologically advanced or anything else, but no, they come out of a jungle world, they're all tattooed and half wild, and their boss, Demon Dread, calls himself the Wild. I understand that it's very effective world building if you're 15, but if I don't know, we've seen so much better, and we had seen much better even before then. It just annoys me a lot that we go there and get like this sort of like thing with the Sharans. That just feels unnecessary. Because as I said, you could have like Demandrite just like with Trollocs and whatnot. It would be fine. Instead, you just like drop like another culture that you have like no information about and never give any information about. Like, yes, we have like Jane Foster claiming some shit, but that's about it. We just drop them in there to look scary and exotic, and that's it. Seriously? That's just lazy in a lot of ways. Anyway, that's one of the bigger annoyances. Now let's look at an interesting annoyance that we need to look at. I feel we need to look at because it's the slavery problem. Yes, I promised I would come back to that. So here's the thing. We have a conversation between Egwene and, what's her name? For Tuona. Which is a really lame joke with the for Tuona, seriously. Anyway, we have a conversation there, and it obviously goes really bad because it's once again about like the Damani, and Tuona's like, well, you guys should definitely, you know, all be colored and whatnot. And then we have yeah, you know what you should do is like hold the peace, and then we go to the marketplace of ideas, and definitely the good ones will win in the marketplace of ideas. So you know, everyone who wants to go to the Shanshan and be colored as a Damani should be free to do that, and they'll send missionaries and whatnot. And that's a weird idea there, but it's not where I want to go with it. Where I want to go with it in general is, and there's like a very interesting thing that Egwene says, or not says, but thinks about like the rich country of Shanshan. And she's like, yeah, that wealth was built on the backs of enslaved women that can channel. And that's wrong. That's completely wrong. Because there's that other sort of slavery in the country that we have never spoken about. Right? You remember the Duck Vale? Probably you don't, because they're not exactly interesting or anything. They're just like the enslaved masses that get like sold and everything, like proper chattel slavery. That's Duck Vale. And they are not the group of slaves that we talk about. Like, no one talks about them. No one even thinks about like maybe freeing them. No, it's just the Damani that are of interest. Because, of course, this is a fantasy still at the end of the day about elites. And here's the problem. I've spoken about that before, right? The issue is that fantasy, when you start with like your groups, like your 1930s, 40s fantasy, your Tolkien or even your pulp stuff, is always about extraordinary, larger-than-life characters. Your Conan, your Fafhrd and Grey Mouses, they are heroes. They're larger-than-life. That has like an existentialist kind of bend to it with people like Robert E. Howard. And on the other hand, it has that mythological bend with people like Tolkien, who's like, I'm going to try to use elements or get inspired by mythology. In mythology, you also talk about like very specific people, and the rest don't matter. We don't even know who's running the stables in fucking Gondor, right? It's like Pippin goes there and checks. We have no name of any stable hand in the country of Gondor, in the city of Minas Tirith. We don't have those names. No one cares about them. It's about the heroes that exemplify specific human attributes and so forth. That's something that we do. We don't care about the economics. No one cares about the economics of Middle-earth. Maybe Tolkien had ideas about that, but I'm sure they were not like very... For the stories, they are not necessary. Those kingdoms work. We can just assume they work. There's farmers, and that will just like be enough for it. And then we can look at Aragorn and Gimli and our like the Fellowship and everything. That's how that works, because it's mythology. We don't learn about like who's running all those, you know, longhouses and villages all the way back during any like Icelandic saga. That's not important. The only person who's not a big hero in you know, the Odyssey is Oimaeus, the swineherd, and he has like a very specific role to play. He's also like an example and not not just random people that run, Odysseus farms and whatnot on Ithaca. That's not how that works. And the problem is that with something like Wheel of Time, that Robert Jordan was aware of that fact, and we can see him trying to include more people. We have innkeepers, we have scenes where people walk into a city and there's like, yeah, this woman selling string and this woman selling this and this man selling this. There's shopkeepers, there are people running businesses. The world is not completely empty, because Robert Jordan around the year 1984 realized that a world is has more people in it than just the heroes, and that's great. But it never really goes beyond that. And it sometimes jumps back into the other side. So we still have a story that at its heart is about like a few very privileged characters. Egwene, who becomes like superpowered, which, gets a lot of magic and becomes a witch queen, so to speak. She becomes the Armelin seat. It's about Rand, who becomes Fireball Jesus. It's about Matt, who becomes, Saint Odin the Gambler. It's about Perrin, who becomes like Wolf King, I guess. It's about Elaine, who becomes queen and witch, so probably also witch queen, I guess. It's about elites, and they don't think about the rest. And at the end of the day, Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson have no interest in the rest of those people either. So they show up when we need the good people of the country, which come to defend their kingdom against the land against the Dark One, or they show up as window dressing, and the Dac of Vale are window dressing. They are just there to stand in the background, look erotic, like have like basically nothing on, so people are always scandalized by almost naked people that are just standing around to look good. They're literally window dressing, just like all the slave girls that Conan gets to free during his adventures, which is also not exactly, cool. But once again, at the end of the day, it feels like neither Robert Jordan nor Brandon Sanderson, at the end of the day, care about the fact that they have built or put into their world an entire empire that's built on chattel slavery for its economic, growth and everything. And when they talk about the idea of slavery, we have already spoke about like how basically we still don't really talk about it. It's like, yeah, well, needs must, the end justifies the means, the greater good and whatnot. Let those people rot, and let just use Damani on the concept of Damani for our weird, simplistic, sadistic idea of karma, with especially Elida or whatnot, and on the other hand, for a plotline with Egwene when she can free herself from that. That's fine, but for the rest, we don't care about. We even go so far that like Egwene is like, yeah, it was all the slavery was done with women who can channel. It's like, no, it's all the other people that are actual slaves in like a system where they are just like bought and sold and whatnot. We just like push all of that, brush that under the carpet and just ignore it. And that's just like, that's bad world building, because yeah. You have slavery in there and you don't address it. When you address it just for the elite and ignore the rest. It's like, what's wrong with you, man? I don't know. It just felt really wrong and annoyed me in that situation, because I'm like, no, how come no one thinks about the Dac of Vale? How come no one, they just show up when someone needs to look at like their boobs, and I'm like, all right, is that all? And it's like a missed chance, because we even have the storyline with Julian and Amathera made Dac of Vale, and then he frees her and all of that. But at the end of the day, it's your slave girl love interest story, and doesn't go beyond that. Yeah, she's super afraid of everyone, and he has to, through his like love and comfort and being the strong man, has to slowly show her that she doesn't have to be afraid of everything. But we don't address the fact that we're talking about slavery here. And that's just like, I don't know. Annoys me. But, I mean, as I said, there's a lot of things that annoy me about these books at this point. I just wanted to point that one out because even I was like guilty of that. Like, I ignored the Dac of Vale for a long time. It's like, okay, whatever. And then I realized, no, we're only talking about that elite. And then I was like, wait a moment, that's wrong. And you can look at that and then go and make all kinds of parallels to how movements for equality are often still led by a group of by privileged people who then ignore people that have the same or victims of the same sort of discrimination, but are from a less privileged class. It's like you go all the way back to like voting rights in feminism. White feminism is a huge problem, for example. Parallels just out there. I'm just saying you could use Wheel of Time to point that out, but on the other hand, it just feels like both Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson just forgot about the fact that they put like an actual empire of slaves in slavery in there because they felt that slavery was important to build, that Orientalism, right? That Orientalism where you have an entire empire built on slavery, exploitation, and decadence on the top, which then leads to effeminacy, that greatest of problems. Speaking of which, we have our token gay man. I'm obviously not sure here, but we've come to like book 14, and all of a sudden, Land looks to this other guy and it's like, everyone who looked at the guy could see that he really preferred men to women. I'm like, all right, I'm glad you acknowledge it. But it also feels like very much like this is written in like the year 2013, 12, 13. Maybe someone felt that it might be interesting to include homosexuality beyond the idea of pillow friends. So we pick someone no one really cares about and who will die very soon, and we make sure that he's gay. And I'm like, all right. Good that we tick that box as well. Fine. Got it. All right. What else is going on? Well, Perrin is running around trying to fight Slayer, getting into all kinds of trouble, always meeting, what's her name? Sindane, former Lanfear, and not liking her. And I just really don't like the whole thing with the Dreamland combat between Perrin and Slayer just is boring. It's like, yeah, and then I turn this into this, and then I turn this into this, and then I turn this into this. Like, look, if we're talking, your old, which Merlin versus, what's her name, Min in that, Nim? In that, Nimue, whatever, in that old Disney movie kind of combat. Or Welsh mythology when people turn themselves into all kinds of animals to have their battle. I get it. But we've got this rolled out over scenes, and it just... This is not an animation. This is not an animated movie where it looks cool. This is just words. And at some point, I get bored by it. I get really bored by it. Apart from that, Rand walks into that place, into Sheol Ghul, and he hangs in there and does a sword fight with Moradin for some reason. And Perrin rams the Dream Spike there so no one can travel in or out, and has the wolves guard the place so Slayer can't go in and attack, or not come in easily to attack Rand. Which, neat trick there. I'm fine with it. It's okay. It literally is about how that structure is too bloated, how we have these aspect of the unnecessary Sharon exoticism, the issue with slavery, the token gay man that is really unimportant because yeah, look, we also have one gay person in this whole world. Fine. What else? The volcano? Should we talk about the volcano thing? And that is inconsistency again. Look, there's gateways, I know. And I know in theory that the gateways are different when they are made by dudes or by women. I get it. But in both cases, there's the idea of having a traveling ground and stuff like that. The idea that people build portals in specific places that they need to know. They can't just make a portal to anywhere in the world. That's the theory. So you have some limitation on your traveling, because otherwise it would be maybe too powerful. But on the other hand, Whenever it suits someone in the story and we need it, people can make portals to anywhere. It starts out with Avienda, right? She just like makes a portal into nowhere, like into Shanchan, all the way back in Fires of Heaven. Fine. Now you can argue that she's panicking and she just makes it somewhere and it's just like lucky that it's in the snows in Shanchan and not like 500 meters up in the air. You can do that, and I might be okay with that argument. But on the other hand, how come that someone like, well, Androl can just make a huge gateway into the boiling lava under a volcano, under Dragonmount? How? I assume he has never been there to memorize the place. So how does that work? I'm like, and I'm sure you can come up with some weird explanations on why it works, but at the end of the day, the problem that I see with it is that you have a medium there, you have a narrative device there, right, which is a portal, a gateway that lets you go from one place to another very fast. So you don't have to like stretch out your narrative over years and years because people need to write everywhere. I get that, but you don't want to have it like all powerful because it's an extremely powerful piece of magic. So you come up with like ways to limit it. One way that we've seen is, of course, the dream spike that makes this dome. When within that dome you can't actually like build portals. Fine, I can live with that. Makes a lot of sense. The other one is that, yeah, you can only travel to places that you've been before, that you can imagine, and form the picture in your mind to then build that portal. I can get that. Fine. But why is it sometimes and sometimes not? It's like, make it consistent. Because otherwise, it feels like you're like, you just want an arbitrary, limitation on it right now, so you come up with something stupid, and then when you need it, like, in a different way, you're just like, oh, whatever. We'll just, like, drop tons of lava on our Trollocs. And to be fair, that's just, like, a ridiculous, like, thing. You have, like, hundreds of thousands of Trollocs. Like, how many millions of Trollocs have been slaughtered in this book? Like, literally, how many millions? It's insane. And then like one final thing, and that's the Great Captain thing. Like, I've always made like jokes about like who gives out those titles, because the problem is I have no issue with like good commanders being called a Great Captain. It's fine. Sure, they're great tacticians. I get it. They have a lot of experience. All of them are, experienced military commanders with like a talent for battles and shit. I get it. Makes a lot of sense. I'm fine with it. But the way it is described in the book, it makes like everyone in the world knows that the 5 great commanders. There's Pedron Nile, who's dead. There is Davram Bashir. There is Rotol Ituralda. There is Gareth Bryn, and the last one, whom I've just forgotten. Oh yeah, right, Lord Ogilmar. And they are the great captains. And if you're like, who gives out that license? Who gives out the license to call yourself a great captain? Is there like the Randlands Academy for Military Brilliance or something, and they run like standardized tests where people need to go and people need to make like exams and shit? How does that work? And then like you can like look in your like Randlands Craigslist and look for great captains or something. It's like, how does that work? And to make it easy to put out my point here, is like a general thing that we see both with Robert Jordan and a lot of fantasy later on, which is like that need to categorize everything. There's like the great captains. There's like the 9 rods of dominion. There's like everything has to be numbered and put in like categories and boxes all over the place. Everything has to be exactly labeled. It's no longer you're a damn good general. No, you're a great captain. You reached the great captain achievement, and now everyone calls you great captain. It's like, it's unnecessary, and it makes a lot of things weird because we have all these great captains there, and yeah, Tam Althor, who is like in theory a farmer, but also, a great sword master and whatever. But he can like figure out that Davram Bashir he can figure out all those super hard to find mistakes. Tamal Thor can do it. Lanman Dragoran can take over from Agelmar and figure out that the problem is there, and his gay friend who can also figure it out. And well, Matt can figure it out. I mean, yeah, he's got like his like update thing like going on there, but still, it's like, if those are such great captains, how come that like all these other people can figure out their mistakes and realize them and tell them what they should have done in the battle? Why? Suddenly they don't seem that great anymore because, You know what I mean? It's like we bestow titles that are meaningless because we need to have titles and categories in our world, and that's something that feels very role-playing gamey and not, or computer gamey, and not very novel kind of way, in a way. You know what I mean? And I just wanted to point that out. It's not like a big criticism. I think it's like a general thing that we see with a lot of modern fantasy that need to structure everything, to put everything into categories and boxes and levels and whatnot. And I'm just not like a huge fan of it, but it's not a big deal. It's just like kind of ridiculous, like if like every, sheep herder from the Two Rivers can figure out that a great captain made a mistake. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll see how I split the rest of the novel, because that's this like 9-hour monstrosity of like a final battle chapter there. You'll find out tomorrow and on Friday, and then we'll be free and talk about wonderful good books over the weekend. I've got some interesting things there. Have a great evening. Cheers.